Pastoral Identity. You'll see on your screen Adam and Shada and Michael. And what we're here to talk about are 3 items this week. Number 1, the experiment we were asked to do in terms of naked versus dressed for pastoral identity. Number 2, the embodied listening exercise. And number 3, some reflections on the book of Daniel, first episode that we listened to. So how about if we start out with the naked and dressed interview? I will not show you my pictures because they're really not humiliating because I'm naked, but humiliating because I'm a horrible artist. But the words that I used for when I was dressed up to picture myself dressed for pastoral care was number 1, casual, somewhere in the middle of casual and formal. So not too casual, not too formal. Pleasant, because I was smiling. And the third one was full frontal, because I drew myself sort of unconsciously straightforward, looking at people. Did you guys have any other words that would work?
Yeah. I wouldn't have put full frontal on the clothed one, but I just came from this weekend. I met on Friday. I met with a family who someone had died. So I was thinking about the identity I would have wearing my collar for the viewing yesterday and the funeral today. So trying to project that, I was thinking of confident, calm, and patient. I guess wishing those adjectives onto myself as I did some actual pastoral care.
Makes sense.
Cool. Yes. I did not draw. I imagined these images since I'm also terrible at drawing. But my words were first stylish, or like in the sense of being put together. Now the word was clear, as in like I was wearing a collar, and so it was completely clear to the outside world what my identity was. And I can come back to explain that a little bit. And then the third one was capable. And I think I actually didn't think very much in jotting these down, so it was a sort of a fun pre-conscious exercise. But I definitely noticed like it felt really important for me to be wearing the collar and it to be completely clear who I was, because of 2 things. First is that I come from a tradition that, or one branch, the conservative branch of a tradition that doesn't ordain women. So to me, like, I know part of my work as I step into this role, part of my embodiment will be consciously taking on the outer garments that indicate, this change in identity for me. So I know that feels really important to me, and it may not be important to me later on in life, but it's important now. And then also just, I think it's also reaching back into my memory of when I was a chaplain in hospital settings, that I was not ordained then and did not have the shorthand of a collar, right, in that setting, which was always really helpful. I always had to explain who I was, especially since I was really young and people didn't believe me half the time. So that's sort of behind that word for me.
I thought a little bit about the collar too, because in our tradition, Dr. Swain knows this probably better than I do, but until we're ordained, we don't wear the collar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So therefore, I wouldn't be up in CPE this summer. I won't be ordained, so it'll be interesting to see how I kind of make that switch. Can we go to the naked picture now?
I was just going to comment on the collar as well,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I was thinking the same kind of thing. I'm Lutheran, and apparently Lutherans, you can wear the collar whenever you want. But I tend not to.
It freaked me out when I came to the seminary. I was going, what are all these people doing with collars on? So.
It is a little strange, but I tend to not wear it, and my cooperating pastor, I'm doing the co-op program, so I'm interning for 3 years, and he's said you should try it on. So for Lent, I'm going to wear it as often as possible and see kind of what that feels like. So I'll be actually embodying that mental picture of the pastor and see what happens.
Cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Keep reporting to us on that, okay?
Yeah.
I will. You should wear it on the next hangout just to, get used to it. All right, naked. Mine. No. It's all right. Naked, I had lying down, I had heavier, and I had more abstract. And I know that's 3 really weird words, but I did draw myself kind of like in bed reclining.
That's so fascinating.
Psychology 101.
Well, it has this sense of you like shedding something, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess naked
yeah, for me, I would have, I pictured myself in one of those like clothed, unclothed. So I was standing, but I would have, the adjectives I would have thought it would be like hidden. I would have wanted to hide, shamed, just because it's what we're, in culture to do, and certainly in my, yes, and unsure, kind of, as opposed to confident with clothes on and the collar and ready to go. It's the opposite of that.
I have an art teacher friend who all through the first maybe 10 years of our friendship wanted to draw me naked. And I kept going, no, you don't understand. I can't. I can go skinny dipping. I can get in the hot tub with you naked, but I cannot like lay there, do the mop.
The sustained gaze.
Really, that's it. Sustained gaze.
My words were soft and lumpy, but also bright, which surprised me. I don't know where that came from, but so.
I mean, I thought what the exercise did in a very, very interesting way is made me think about this public and
yeah.
So when I got into the reading and understood the false and true self, although I still have some problems with those words, I think that there was some interesting things that I could draw out of that. So how about we go on to the embodied listening exercise? I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot to talk about here, except that, the reaction of people is pretty negative when you're not making eye contact with them, when you're not doing all the listening things that we know make good listeners. Any thoughts on that?
I just thought it interesting before we started talking about that a little bit. When you have kids, it's easy to do the second, right? The opposite of being attentive, and of course we work against that. But when we're busy with our phones or reading or doing the things that parents do, kids try to get our attention all the time. So when I was thinking about that experiment, I was thinking about my kids and trying to put myself in their shoes. That kids can try to get our attention in all sorts of ways. Sometimes after you already have their attention, they already have your attention. But it reminds me that when we're doing this work, right, we just not to treat people like children, I guess, which isn't, we shouldn't treat children like children, but it was a good reminder.
Yeah, I experienced much the same thing with my kids, but as you were speaking, I was also reminded how often I actually try to get them to pay attention to me too, right? Like how often I'm saying to you, stop, look at me, so that I know that they will. And then usually for the purpose, like it's not usually for the purpose of my it's more like for information retention, right? Like so that aspect of it, that when we're distracted like that, it is so thoroughly superficial that our brains don't actually even retain what's happening to us, right? And so many times I've said things to them and they've said things to me, and when we're distracted, we don't remember later on, and we're like, I told you this, and you're like, no, you didn't. And so it's like, it's also a physiological experience too, right? Like, it has actual consequences in how our brains, I think, retain information and process the information too.
That's so true. I've been struggling with the same thing with my 5-year-old. Look at me, please.
Yeah.
And as a teacher for 31 years, I can tell you I had the same experience in the classroom. Look, up here, pay attention. So, all right, let's move to Book of Daniel for just a little bit in terms of the sense of true self, sense of false self, and the becoming and the unbecoming sort of stuff. Do you want to start us off, Shada? Is there anything that just kind of...
Well, for everything that's going on, he seemed actually remarkably calm. So, I think that that's probably part of his pastoral identity, like to be a person who is calm and can handle things. I noticed, so specifically meaning the main character, Daniel, I noticed, like, towards the end, or at least towards the end of the part we were supposed to watch, when his father came to visit, oh, we can't talk about this without having spoilers, but
spoiler alert.
Yeah, that there was an offhand comment where his father was like, do I need to call your brother to handle this? And it was like, no, I got this. So there's part of that is the a capable pastoral identity. Like, that seems an aspect of it. Somebody who has things handled.
I thought his interaction with the bishop, first of all, the fact that the bishop is Ellen Burstyn is too cool for words, but his interaction with her, I thought, was very interesting. I thought it showed an awful lot of self-possession, where somebody might have caved, especially in our church where it's very, very hierarchical. What the bishop says sort of goes. I thought he handled that well. And then the scene with the mother, where they turned off the machine where she was dying, parishioner, I thought he did. I mean, you could argue with specific words that he said, maybe, if you wanted to, but the idea of being in possession of himself and trying to live out who he was, I thought was pretty good. The one remark that really made me like just howl was when they were arguing at the table. His family was arguing at the table, and he says, "Hey, priest sitting here." That kind of priestly presence in the midst of just a family argument. So
yeah. Well, that does remind me that I have been thinking about, but I will continue to need to do a lot of thinking as I take on a more official pastoral identity, what that will mean in terms of my family identity too. Like, they're just a family, right? And he's just the father. And of course there are overtones, like there were definitely overtones of keeping a respectable facade, while everything happens. Like, there's an extra sense of tension because, when the daughter was in trouble, she was a PK, but also there's a healthy part to that as well, which is just, he's just a person, right? And so he's still just a father. And so I was thinking today about my daughter, who was just being a little snarky and made some comment about, I don't care about your stupid church stuff or something like that.
Right.
And it's like it will, and there are times where she really does, but it takes on an extra layer of them dealing with my pastoral identity and how it relates to my identity as their mother. I think that's going to be interesting to explore.
Yeah, the family around the table where, mom's got her own set of issues, daughter has a set of issues, gay son, adopted Chinese son. I think it's really interesting how that impacts, how his role as a pastor impacts the family. Adam, did you see that played out in your own life at all?
Yeah, well,
the church versus demands of the family.
Yeah, and Shada, keep us updated on that. I've been having a lot of the similar thoughts about, how's this, even seminary, right? It's going to impact my family and going forward. I'm a PK, so I can relate in some ways already to what's going on there, but it's different on the other side. And I've been running away from this side of it for a long time. So, and not necessarily because of the way that it will impact the family, but, and not to say, my family is very supportive, but it'll be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. The weird thing that kind of plays out is this very rich life that he's leading. I mean, the house that he lives in is lovely. The Volvo that he drives is lovely.
Oh, you mean like wealthy?
Wealthy,
oh.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, the fact that there's somebody there that's helping out with the household duties and things like that. I don't know who she really is exactly yet, but and that he has the golf club membership and all that sort of thing. I mean, it's so Episcopalian. It's like kind of write a ridiculous pastiche of what the Episcopal Church used to be like. I don't know many rectors that are doing that, although there are some that I do know that are, in it for the power and the glory, I guess. Any other thoughts on Book of Daniel?
Well, I was interested, this may be sort of around part of the true self, false self part, which I can't, I think it's still developing. It's not 100% clear in this first episode, right? But this part of him that, as you would say, was pushing against the bishop, the part of him that was, trying to preach sort of against the party line in a sense, the part of him that, I mean, this was made, I guess, 2006, 2007, I think Dr. Swain was saying. So, I mean, even then in the Episcopal Church, homosexuality was still, challenging, right? I remember when, so he's, clearly got an out gay son who he accepts. And so there's this counter church culture kind of part of him. And then there's the good pastor part of him, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how they continue to interact throughout the series. Part of it, maybe I think we'll see perhaps that his father triggers him in a different way than the bishop does. That he's able to push back on her a little bit more than in a way that he maybe is not able with his own father. Oh, and we didn't talk about Jesus.
Oh, I know. Got to talk about Jesus. That's the most ridiculous thing. I'm sorry. I can't. I'm having trouble dealing with it. Very typical white Jesus, long hair, swinging his little, what do you call it, cincture or whatever. It's just a little bit too. I don't know what's going on there, and I don't know whether it's totally tongue-in-cheek or not. I mean, obviously their conversations are very much, on the slant side of reality. I don't know. I wonder if there's kind of that false self or the imaginative part of what we were reading that fits in there. I don't know. It freaks me out.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a completely conscious, depiction of Jesus, but it's kind of fun the way he's totally cash,
Yeah, and I don't know how much it feeds into that popular culture notion that really it's oh, this is what's wrong with Jesus.
Right. At least he's not idealized.
Yeah,
he has some actual relationship to things that happen to people day to day. which I think is what is kind of fun about it, right? Like he has actual things to say about his current problems.
Yeah. And the line about, you know, am I like special because I hear you or something like that? And Jesus goes, what does he say? Something like, no, I talk to everybody. It's just nobody listens or something. You know, it's cute. But so, okay. Well, any other overall huge thoughts for this week, or shall we wrap up our first video cast?
Well, there was one last question for the book of Daniel, which was, where did we get a sense of God in the whole thing? And you already mentioned it, Michael. The part where it was at the bedside, I think, was where I got a true sense of that, and not just because the camera, you know, was like, woo, out of body kind of thing. But, you know, it just felt, I think it was really more in the relationship, you know, like the presence. I felt like that's where I saw God showing up, at least in that context.
And I think that there's something going on with the oh shit moment when he realizes like the depth of the embezzlement and the fact that he went to bat for this brother-in-law of his or whatever, and it turns out so badly. I thought that there was a couple of moments there that were God in that, you know, I've got to deal with this. I've got to focus on it. I've got to get through this, even though it's bad and even though it's going to hurt a lot of people. So.
Right. The accountability. Yeah.
So. Cool. Well, I hope we did it. Any final thoughts?
Nope.
Just say stay tuned for next week for our second vlog. So, thanks, guys, for playing along.
Awesome. Thank you for setting it all up.
I'm going to stop the broadcast and we can chat after.